Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. My screen seems to be a little bit slow coming on with images, but Eddie Burgess is my name, and I'm your host this morning. I work with Teagasc in the Agricultural Catchments Programme, and I've been working in the area of water quality for quite some time. So it's very appropriate, I suppose, this morning that I'm introducing you to Philip Murphy, who's presenting today. And Philip's topic is targeting water quality actions in catchments of concern. I've known Philip for quite some time. I first got to know him when he was doing his PhD, and he did that on nutrient management across a series of fairly intensive dairy farms on a field by field basis, managing the nutrients at I don't know whether to say a big scale or a small scale, but at a very localized individual plot basis. And Philip then went on to work with Law Pro from that and with the Waters of Life project on a tributary of the Blackwater close to Kanturk. And in recent times, he's come back to Teagasc and is now working as a catchment coordinator with the Blackwater, so in a river that he knows, a catchment that he knows well. I wish him the very best of luck in that role. A significant part of Teagasc's water quality campaign. We have 6 catchment coordinators taken on in the last year, working in along the east and south coast of Ireland. I think, depending on what you count, I'd say probably 8 to 10 catchments. Also helping me this morning with the questions is the catchment coordinator for the Boyne catchment, Fiona Doolan, who those of you that watch this Signpost webinar on a regular basis will be well familiar with. And Fiona, thanks very much for coming along this morning. So we're all about water today. Philip, I suppose from my background in the Catchments Programme, and a research and advisory programme, a lot of people get frustrated with us because we don't make things any simpler. Our message comes out saying that water is what the quality is, what it is for a multitude of actions, and in practice, one size of measures does not fit all. It's a common statement that we come out, and we need to be putting in targeted actions if we want to see improvements. And they need to be specific to what the problem is and what the physical setting is and what the farming practice and what the weather is, all combined. So I suppose it's very appropriate at this time when we have so many different agencies coming together to look at water quality and try and bring about improvements, that we are putting in place findings that is coming out of research saying that things need to be more targeted rather than a broad brush approach. Am I correct in that, and have I left anything out in my introduction?
No, it's very good, Eddie. It's like you're saying with the research projects involvement is very different to be down on the farmer level, working with farmers on individual paddocks and trying to generate advice at a paddock level, never mind trying to get industries across the agri sector to kind of work together on getting farmers on board or different enterprises and all the different kind of variables you get with it. So there kind of is a need for a role or one common or key message to come through, let it be tailored by local information. But the idea ultimately, like you're saying there, is to get a kind of a key clear message to the farmer on the ground. And we can't really afford to get it wrong either at this stage, Eddie. We need accurate advice, and the water quality is kind of a long-term game. So we need it to be accurate and, give it the time to settle into as well and get actions implemented so we can see improvements nationally.
Yeah. Well, Philip, I suppose with that introduction, I'll hand over to you. But just before I do, I just want to remind the audience. I know everyone is, or the vast majority of people are regular listeners, but it's no harm to repeat it. The session is being recorded and it's available to view back and able to listen to on a podcast at later stages if you have to rush away for one reason or another, or if you find anything interesting and you need to tell any colleagues. And I will encourage people to use the Q&A, the questions and answers tab at the bottom of the screen, and Philip will be presenting for the balls of half an hour and ballpark, and then we'll have questions and answers after that. Philip, I'll hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Eddie. So, a lot of what you're talking about there, that effort to get to key messages and clear, consistent messages to farmers on the ground and water quality is kind of captured by the Better Farmer for Water campaign, which is what we're involved with nationally. And there's 6 catchment coordinators assigned to it to work on 8 specific catchments, which I'll get into. But what all that is coming from, just to give the context on it, is a lot of the water quality information, guidance, expectations, all that comes from the Water Framework Directive. And our version of that is the Water Action Plan. So the latest one being in 2024. Within that, we have a number of sectoral plans that we need to align with across the agri industry. There's 12 of them with kind of lead organizations and what's required to complete or carry out the goals in each. And then we have our water quality issues. The catchments that need reductions in nitrogen concentrations was an EPA report released a number of years ago that highlighted where nitrate was high, elevated above, ideal ecological conditions at the estuary, which put highlighted the particular catchments that needed work. And then finally, the minister at the time for Agriculture, Food and Marine, Charlie McConalogue, had requested that Teagasc put together a portfolio or a program for this, and that's what became the Better Farm for Water campaign. Within that, there's 8 actions for change, which are eight measures that every farmer can consider adopting, and the nuance of them can be down to some of this work. And then within that, the delivery of it through, first of all, a multi-actor approach to multiple industries, and then building awareness, upskilling, and through research and KT after that as well. So I have a lot of maps to show today because most of my work to date has been on Excel sheets, but mapping it is the best way of kind of illustrating the work. And these are our 8 catchments that are kind of the priority or the main areas we're going to be working in first for the Better Farm for Water campaign. Fiona Doolan there is working on the Boyne up around the Midlands North there. Kieran Sheelan has 2 catchments with the Barrow and the Nore. Neelis Noonan is working on the Slaney. Claire Mooney on the Shore. Myself, I'm working on the Blackwater. And Oisin Coakley is working on both the Lee and the Bandon there. So kind of through this presentation, I'm going to just walk you through some of the initial work program work, so far. That's including the water body selection process, which is within each of those catchment boundaries there that I'm showing in the different colours. And then kind of an engagement strategy, an initial engagement strategy, and how to get farmers involved in the work as well, and advisors too. So focusing, on the Blackwater, I'll try and walk you through the processes here. I'm going to talk a lot about different boundaries, and although they're invisible, they're quite important. I'll show you the main channel in the Blackwater, where subcatchments fit in, and sub-basins. Looking at the Blackwater alone, we kind of typically associate it with County Cork, but it actually it just creeps into 5 counties altogether: parts of Kerry, parts of Limerick, Waterford, Tipperary, and obviously the majority of it comes through Cork as well. So that red line is the catchment boundary that my remit is for, which is a fairly substantial area, and there's going to be a lot of stakeholders, a lot of farmers within that boundary. Just to show you here the main channel, the most westerly part starts in Ballydesmond, goes to Rathmore, Banteer, Mallow, Fermoy, out to Lismore, and eventually to Youghal, out to the estuary. And I suppose that's the first point it comes to with the water quality side. The nitrate levels are kind of elevated beyond ideal conditions for the estuaries. So what that means is every water body in the Blackwater is important to some aspect. So when Youghal is, the finishing point of it, everything back above that or upstream of that is important. Now, as a catchment coordinator, we see the catchment a bit differently. We have a number of ways of looking at the main channel and how it's divided up. One of the ways is per subcatchment, and the subcatchment could contain a number of individual water bodies, or a river system. So we might be familiar with the Funcheon or the Bride or the Glenaboy and Tallow and those ones. So those are subsections. But within each subsection are individual sub-basins, as they're called, river sub-basins. I'll be calling these water bodies kind of as we as I progress through the talk, it's just kind of muscle memory at this stage to call them water bodies, but it's the smallest unit that we'll be working with in terms of a catchment area. And ultimately, what each individual line represents is the flow of water from rainfall down through the landscape, interacts with all different landscape characteristics and eventually ends up in the lowest point of the watershed or the catchment, say, and then flows into the main channel before making its way out. So it's quite important that the water flow and the water movement is quite important because it helps us kind of steer a little bit of the targeting. In my case, in the Blackwater, there's 158 sub-basins altogether, and I'll be calling them water bodies more than likely as we go ahead. So as I said, the nitrate reductions are high, so that means all 158 are important to some point. There's a few aspects to try and remember with water quality. One of them is that there's never only just one pressure, and sometimes they may not always be significant, so there may not always be evidence of impact or not, say. There's 8 actions that we need to improve, so how do we get them down to kind of farm level? And then, our roles as well. So I'll just explain that in kind of the context of just one water body, say. So for any individual section here, I'm just looking at a subsection of homogeneity, you're going to have these multiple pressures, and all acting in different different capacities, maybe different pollutant type or a different source problem or a different pathway, whatever way it'll work. So there's going to be multiple pressures that'll be acting in any one catchment. And our goal, say, in the Teagasc side of it is to deal with the agricultural pressures. One way of kind of discerning between them is the local catchment assessment here, the LCA. That is a process of determining what the source is, what the pathway is, and how it makes its way to a river. So that's just in terms of that pollutant. And this applies to any pressure and all pressures. And then finally, we have to get our measures, our farm level measures that can be from the nutrient side, the farmyard, or the land management. And they're kind of the questions coordinators to ask in terms of where do we go first and how do we go about getting the right message to farmers on the ground. So how do we discern between the pressures? We as catchment coordinators won't be carrying out the local catchment assessment, which is, a kind of high resolution river habitat assessment. Law Pro and the EPA are specialized in that. And then how do we match the measure to the issue in the water body so that we make sure that it's effective? Okay, so a lot of this goes into the kind of data gathering and that side of it as well. At the moment, we have a lot of work done by the EPA and local authorities on identifying areas for action. These are the national level, and they're very effective at being targeted first on where actions will be needed, so that where measures are put in to deal with any particular pressure, those measures will be effective in kind of improving the water quality for that area. But if we apply that just to the Blackwater only, and I'll show you this in a second, it covers, say, about 70 out of 158 water bodies. So there's some gaps there. And, as a catchment coordinator, I kind of want a role for each of the water bodies or each of the individual water bodies that I want to work in. And so there's a little bit of a gap to fill there in the work program. A lot of the data that's available there is actually publicly available on be it data.gov or the EPA websites as well have a lot of these data sets that are available. All this is used for deciding what the areas for action should be. But we decided that if we could use that data and look at it through the lens of the Better Farm for Water program, there's some particular aspects that will be quite valuable from that publicly available data. The first thing that we considered is at-risk water bodies where agriculture is a significant pressure. And the second thing was a lead organization for the area for action. And they proved to be kind of very valuable in steering, I suppose, which water bodies we can go to first and where we lacked. But there's still going to be gaps in the work program. So just showing you here first, again, on the Blackwater, 158 water bodies, the ones that have agriculture, where it's significant, meaning there's kind of where measures will be put in, they'll be effective at improving water. It covers a substantial area, but not all the area. And in this case, the individual subsections of the river, they're at risk. So they're at risk of not meeting their objective of good or high. So those would be kind of a priority in fairness, but there's a lot of other water bodies that are still, require action. That second parameter then from the public, say from those data sets, are the lead organizations, which is based on the areas for action. In most cases, it'll be LawPro who carry out that valuable local catchment assessment process. But in many cases, there'll be catchment projects like the Duhallow one. And I know myself that the Waters of Life project is working here on the Lisduggan as well, and the Blackwater, I think it's the 90 tributary of that as well. So that'll be up to me to engage with at that side. And that's the main point with the lead organizations. They offer a chance to engage with people who are acting on the water quality down at the ground. So they may have, more relevant information, more recent information, and at a higher resolution as well. So that's become an important parameter for the water body selection process. So that addresses two of our questions. So how do we discern between pressures? Well, there's a data set there that leaves us steers us towards where agriculture is significant. It also tells us where agriculture, it may not be determined as significant pressure in the water body, but there may still be agricultural activity that could be impacting water. So that gives us a bit of flexibility there. The local catchment assessment then, so the LCA, the lead organizations, as I said, typically are carrying out local catchment assessment. So it avoids us carrying it out from our perspective, but it also creates an opportunity to engage with those lead organizations on the ground and get up-to-date information on, say, the rivers or tributaries. When you apply this to the Blackwater catchment area, just for my own role as a coordinator, there's going to be, the way I've prioritized them, there's 39 water bodies, and they largely overlap with, say, the areas for action that exist. So there's still, we've got to one stage with our work program and working again where action is happening already. But there's a lot of water bodies that still have no either lead organization, or maybe agriculture isn't significant, but it could still be a pressure. So there's a large kind of gap in the work program there. To fill that gap, there's one other parameter that was used for this water body selection point. One of the most important things in getting a key message to farmers on the ground is to know what the significant issue is in a river. It's really the bridging point between, say, a catchment assessment and a farm level measure. Normally determined by that work on the ground, as I mentioned, but it takes a lot of time to produce the likes of a referral and to have it on a widespread area. So very valuable where it's available, but there's a need for kind of action in other parts of the catchment as well, those gaps that I mentioned. So the EPA flag map, the latest update of that from 2025, at an individual water body scale assigns individual, I suppose, the most likely significant issue to be in a water body. So essentially, that works as a proxy for a significant issue. So when that parameter is brought in, we kind of tick all the boxes that we need for, say, building that prioritization of that work program. So we focus on agriculture. We try to avoid inventing the wheel by not reinventing the wheel by doing the local catchment assessment. We can get the right measure in the right place by having a good idea of what the significant issue will be. So putting all that together then for the Blackwater, our ag water bodies and then overlapped with the areas for action leaves those gaps that are left there around those edges on the perimeter, say. But that flag map issue. So the flag is the farm landscape agricultural measures map, say. Those fill in the gap. So we have an indication of what, agricultural issues to look out for in those catchments. So that kind of completes our work program for the Blackwater. We've got a job to do for each of those 158 water bodies, and we have a way of kind of prioritizing them now as well. They can be grouped in different ways, which I'll go through, but ultimately at the individual water body level, we know how much, we know what the main drivers are, the main issues are to keep, just to develop that key message in terms of water quality. Just an illustration of that. So for the Blackwater again, so that 158 water bodies is divided into two groups, say priority group 1 and 2. And within that, so priority 1 is where agriculture is significant, whether there's a lead organization or not, gives us a steer and helps us with kind of what the key messages should be. The second group then as well, it'd be where agriculture may not be a significant pressure, but it could still be agricultural activity that needs to be addressed, particularly through those 8 actions of change from the program. And within that, we have two subgroups again, whether it's a lead organization or not. Excuse me. The flag map measures, as I mentioned, then give us a kind of a within group prioritization if we need it as well. So that helps us steer what our key messages will be, the most likely one, say, coming from an agricultural pressure. So putting that together for the Blackwater, then our priority one groups, the A and B here, shows the distribution of where I suppose we'll attack, some of the engagement or the lead organizations or engaging stakeholders to generate advice related to water quality. We'll cover this area. And the second group as well covers essentially the rest of the catchment between the two groups there as well. So with that all put together, we have a full catchment program, say, from my perspective on the Blackwater. The engagement strategy itself then, so there's one kind of key piece missing from that program. We have where we want to go, but I suppose who we want to go to is the next action. Again, taking a kind of publicly available information or agricultural data, mostly available through data.gov, I was able to get an estimate. We were able to get an estimate on, say, the number of farmers for each of those water bodies. It's based on the LIPIS data, which is the Land Parcel Identification System. It's an anonymized data set, but it was useful for just basically counting how many farms or herd numbers, anonymized herd numbers you'd expect to be in any individual water body. So that gave us an estimate of numbers. So now we're really into the engagement strategy part. And this is where I suppose you can pull in stakeholders from other sides. Every different stakeholder will have a different client, farmer base, maybe a different advisor, private or Teagasc. This will be a way of kind of identifying that reach that we have on a per water body basis. So the idea then, with the engagement strategy, is to kind of show with these priority groups what the, I suppose, context is from both the water quality side, what the goal is, be it for restoration or protection, who the lead organization is, the status over time as well here through the different cycles, and then the last cycle to the current. So that gives a lot of context on a per water body basis up to what's kind of expected or what's going to go on before you go down and engage with farmers on the ground or lead organizations on the ground. Combined with that then is, on the same priority 1A group here on any one water body, we have an idea what the most likely issue is, which is important for picking that key message. We have an idea as well of what the other pressures are. So they all have agriculture as a pressure, but there could be multiple pressures acting on it as well. So we understand that context there too. On top of that is the likes of some water bodies that are designated as high status objective there, the HSO, means that very kind of nuanced or specific actions are needed to make sure that implementation is successful on high status objective water bodies, because they'll be expected to reach the highest standard in water quality for that particular subsection, say. Then from, say, the law pro side, where there's referrals present or not, and then an estimate on the number of farms. Now, I mean it when I say estimate, the anonymized data and the spatial variability and all that goes on with it, it gives us just an indication of how many farms to visit. The reality of it will be different, and I'd actually just mention it here. There's an important point about all the data that I've been using. It's largely indicative, and it's kind of there for decision support. So it's not kind of a clinical results-based approach or anything like that. It's really to kind of give us a guide as to what we should expect between two different water bodies and what actions might be needed there as well. So the idea then is really, we have our priority groups made and we have our key messages kind of developed for any stakeholders that we work with. The agri-data, say from the LIPIS side, was developed much further by an in-house with Teagasc with Jesko Zimmerman and Raymond Feely as well. They did a lot of work at sub-catchment scale, which gives us good indication of sited distribution of agricultural activity as well, be it from arable or grassland. The PIP maps as well, the pollution impact potential maps, and where the largest pressures are expected to be for either nitrogen or phosphorus. And that all will help steer both stakeholders and ourselves on what actions to do. And that's ultimately the goal of this. I know it can be a bit daunting to look at the data that's available and what can be, drawn together from it. But as I said, it's largely indicative, and it's largely to kind of help with decision support, because it's absolutely vital that if we engage any farmer in a catchment area or a catchment boundary like this one, that we're giving them kind of accurate local advice that's valuable for improving their local water body. And with that, you can kind of tailor your eight actions for change. And through, again, your 6 key pillars, which is your multi-stakeholder approach, through the KT side, the research side, it all brings it together, and you kind of replicate that process then for every individual section. Obviously, we're bringing in, our own, say, the Teagasc advisors, inform them of the process of it, maybe visiting, say, the Teagasc offices and outlining this kind of work. And where farmers have private clients as well, the idea is to engage with them as well. Having an event will categorize, a local event on their local water quality, to gather as many farmers or clients together as well and engage on the process. Because, as I said already, although this line is invisible to people on the ground, it's quite important. So the actions of the farmers in these groups and the advisors that they work with, ideally you just want to have the key messages delivered to them so that they can kind of have it so that it's effective on the ground when they are delivering it. So with that then, so the catchment coordinator's role kind of going forward as well, we have a lot of those events. The best advice I got on engagement with farmers is just to go out and knock on doors, which is true. Maps and that will only say much, and data will only say much, but you have to go out and meet people on the ground. So, and on top of that, the ground truth of meeting farmers on the ground kind of really nuances the information we have on water bodies, so it'll trump the data in a lot of ways, to be on the ground and meeting farmers. Ideally, we track some of that engagement through maybe farms visited or attended events, and support the events that are already going on there as well. The next steps then really to speak to those lead organizations, maybe refine that significant issue, identify opportunities to be targeted with key messages, and where a lead organization may be missing from, in terms of the local catchment assessment, there may be a need to identify one, or else work with the advisory network directly, to get some key messages sorted that way. A large part of the catchment coordinator role as well is the catchment implementation and steering group. So the implementation group is it is set up and going for the Blackwater. They kind of deserve a webinar on their own and the work that's involved in them. But they're still in development, some of the catchments. But the idea though is to have a lot of those key agri stakeholders and water quality stakeholders kind of in the one room and working on those priority groups and what it takes to visit farmers or engage farmers and have the key messages go out in the right context, essentially. So that's all for that side then. Realistically then, so to go back to the start, we have our catchment coordinators leading in the main 8 catchments here, and now within that we have our priority groups that we can work in, and we can kind of, once the implementation groups are set up, we can kind of push on with getting down onto the ground. And that's all from me. So I just want to say thanks to everyone who helped me so far, or helped us with the that process, from the Teagasc, from Waters of Life, and the EPA staff that I worked with as well. And just to mention that we have the Water Quality Conference coming up on the 29th of October. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Philip. A very good overview of the huge amount of data that has been collected over many years now. And there's certainly no shortage of data there to give you direction in where actions need to be implemented and what type of action needs to go in there. I just have a couple of questions myself, items that confuse me over the time. You started off there with areas for action from water bodies that are most at risk. And when we're looking at river water bodies and whether they're at risk, I'm guessing it's the assessment of the river at that point, and that river water body, if you like, is the receiving water body, that they weren't looking at the estuary from a nitrogen point of view, that they were where nitrogen has a bigger impact. But over time, we're now in the third cycle of the Water Framework Directive, the European piece of regulation. Am I right thinking that those areas for action have been changed in the different cycles, and there's different phases? And has that changed the focus areas that are being focused on?
Yeah, Eddie, it was kind of hard to get into all the details in the presentation. So to kind of refine that on the ag pressure side and the ag areas for action, they'll change to an extent, but they're still dealing with specific issues usually. So the nitrate, I suppose the trickiest part is nitrate may be elevated in any particular water body, but the status may not be affected directly, and that's say in the river water bodies. And it's, you won't find impacts essentially, are not direct impacts on elevated nitrogen in the river, but it's at the estuary downstream where the impacts are identified. So what that means is you can have a river that doesn't have an ecological impact or an obvious one, say, but it may still have an agricultural pressure on it. So the areas for action tend to cover a kind of the other issues tend to cover the sediment and phosphorus and maybe some direct physical changes in that side of it as well in the river side. And then, they'll include nitrogen as well. But I suppose every water body is going to need some level of effort to reduce nitrate, but it may not always affect status in some places. I suppose that's complicated further then by different pressures acting on a water body. So the at-risk water bodies could have multiple pressures on it, with agriculture being one of them. So as a result, then you have areas for action where a lot of the targeted work can go on in the local catchment assessment, but then there's still a nitrate issue outside of those areas for action, where agriculture is still involved and reductions in losses are needed there.
Yeah,
There's a
no,
few layers to it.
yeah. No, it's not simple. And another one, so I haven't had a chance to look at all the questions that have come in yet, and they're coming in. Thanks very much to those people that are sending them in, and apologies if I'm overlapping ahead of them. But trying to get engagement from participants on the ground, and there are numerous stakeholders, if you say, and it seems to be growing the whole time. But trying to get engagement from those on the ground sometimes can be difficult. And where there has been a problem or where there has been an issue, sometimes it could be an ill wind that throws some opportunity, if you like, to increase engagement. And a lot of us are well familiar that there has been a fish kill in the Blackwater earlier this year, and it hit the media in a big way. And just from that specific example, it really did catch the media. There are other examples around the country, like Our Lady's Island, the lagoon in Wexford, Lough Neagh in the north. They really do grab the media. I suppose that's why there's so much focus on water quality now. Did you find in the Blackwater that disaster, for want of a better word, was a benefit to try and get engagement from various stakeholders necessary to see improvements that may otherwise not have been so forthcoming with their interest in trying to do the right thing in the right place?
It is to a point, yeah. As I tried to show you, it's very hard to discern between different pressures, and there's always going to be different pressures on it. So I suppose our remit is focused on the agricultural side. So with tailored messages, kind of local key actions, the idea is to kind of have on the agricultural side their house in order and have the engagement events and the one-to-one count and all that goes with it, that farmers are doing their best. And there's a lot of work being done out there already, and probably needs to be acknowledged and highlighted about what's been done well from an agricultural perspective by farmers already. And I would emphasize that I don't think that's, there's a lot of good work being done. I think that needs to be showcased too. And then with that, then when you provide the context for the other pressures to farmers or at events, it becomes I suppose, understanding that the catchment approach is necessary. Um, you know, tailored messages down on the ground are going to be better than that catch-all or one size fits all for each pressure. So where agriculture can have its own program of measures that'll work to mitigate issues, the other pressures then have their responsibility to mitigate as well. But the likes of an event on the ground will give that kind of context, and one-to-one advice will give that kind of context on, yes, water quality's dropped or it's not, and it may be due to another pressure. And that we can point towards that with evidence, say, but there's also the case that there's agricultural issues that need to be addressed too. So we'll have our own house in order that way as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I I couldn't agree more with you. From my experience, it's very important to highlight the good as well as the bad. I gave the example there of a bad situation and asking was that of benefit. But if you keep, my experience is if you keep focusing on the negative issues, all you're going to do is drive people away and get a lack of engagement and put them back under a shell, and it's not going to be good in the long run. That's not to say that there aren't issues that need to be tackled, but there's an awful lot of good work being done, and I think if that's not being acknowledged or recognised, people won't stay the course, and understandably. I completely agree with you on that. Fiona, I'm after jumping in there without reading any of the questions. I'll let you come in and then I get an opportunity to see what's coming in.
No problem, Eddie. Philip, a lot of comments here and about the maps you've presented, the information you have. Is there similar information available for the other catchments? And when will they become available, or the engagement piece around that then?
Is that in reference to outside the Better Farm for Water, or?
Well, no, I think within the campaign,
Oh, yeah.
the likes of the similar information for the shore or the Boyne or wherever it is.
So the priority process has been done for all the catchments. So those tables I think are going to be the medium from which we talk to other stakeholders. Those tables of water bodies and, be it the pressure or the ecological status. So they're all done for all the other catchments, say. But as I said, the implementation groups are kind of in development. So it'll be through those that we'll engage stakeholders and engage advisors and advisory networks on where to go and what to do. And I know the case is, Fiona, and Eddie, that it overlaps to an extent with the areas for action and the priority areas for action, which is fine. There's a lot of good work being done in those with ASAP and LawPro and that as well. So there will be overlap there. There will be work being done on those. It's just to kind of acknowledge it or recognize it in this program. And then there'll be work outside of those areas as well, which are the other categories of prioritization as well, where we'll need nearly fresh engagement. That kind of way. It might be a cold start in some of those water bodies that haven't seen this stuff yet.
Philip, I'm just going to come in there just while Fiona's reading. Apologies with the bit of a gap, and it's a change of tack. But there's a question there about modelling being done to determine the expected outcomes from different types of measures, and are the objectives of the Water Framework Directive and the expectations, are they realistic? And 2027 is not as far away as it was yesterday.
No, absolutely not. Well, just in terms of the timeline there, Eddie, water quality is a long-term game. It's there's a big temporal and spatial aspect to it, as you saw with that catchment area there. There's a lot of areas, a lot of farms to get actions in on, and there's, again, acknowledge all the good work that's been done. And then the temporal aspect is to see all that happen, to see all that come true will take a number of years. I can't guarantee any massive changes before 2027, but there's definitely the right structures in place to see some changes over the long term. So I think that'll work there. The first part of your question then, Eddie, what was that?
About modelling to determine the outcome of the different measures.
There's some great opportunities that way at the moment through the program, with the 6 pillars for rolling out the program. The research program is a large part of it. So Measuring effectiveness is being undertaken there from both Johnstown Castle and the Moore Park side on research projects, and the modelling side of it as well in terms of implemented measures, what the potential reduction in, for example, the nutrient load, be it at a farm level or a water body level, the idea of, or sorry, the addressing the potential to mitigate nutrient losses is all kind of underway at these levels within these catchments as well. There's a lot of cases as well, like the likes of the Farming for Water EIP, those schemes and the measures that have gone in through ASAP already. There's a lot of measures in place in farms, and just to try and kind of value what they've brought to date and what it takes to implement them as well. There'll probably kind of a retrospective look at what's been done to date as well, and try and validate some of the good work that farmers have done that way too. So that's another research element that's kind of coming through the program as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I might jump in there with one, Philip. There's a couple of comments here about whether there's a need for additional monitoring in some of these water bodies that are impacted. Do we need additional monitoring, or do we have sufficient information there from the work you've done, and replicate across the catchments to go ahead with the job of work at hand?
Bit of a politician's answer, but we need both. We definitely have enough data there to work with our priority one groups or whatever we want to call them. There's definitely enough information at a high enough resolution where we collaborate with our lead organizations and that to help us steer to get to that point with the right message. There is a few gaps in at the individual water body level as to what data is available, and absolutely ideally, if we could get those gaps filled, it'll help inform us better, but that's why you say they could be a second priority. Maybe that's coming down the line. I would say that if we could fill those gaps, be it on, say, extra monitoring points or data coming into monitoring points, they would absolutely give us confidence in what message we can go out with to farmers on the ground or to advisory networks as well. So I would say there's some there, but there's a couple of gaps in the data that would help as well.
And Philip, a comment here, I'll ask you to comment on this. To improve water quality, we need to move away from intensive beef or dairy systems and move towards a more plant-based system. I think some of your work will have looked at areas where maybe intensive farming isn't the issue at hand, and there can be multiple other things in the background. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, when you start to look at things from that catchment level, you'd often consider irrigation farms and all that goes with it, but we forget to count organic farms and all that their different approach and all that happens. So kind of regardless of whether you're beside a river or regardless of your intensity, there is a role for every farm to have at least reviewed or considered the 8 actions for the water quality aspect. Now, it is only one environmental aspect, so if you do tick all the boxes on those actions and measures that are there for a catchment, there is biodiversity and there is greenhouse gas emissions as well, and there's other campaigns that deal with those as well. So ultimately, you'll try and consider all 3 of those variables at a farm level, but they all have a role to play. I think any agricultural activity has a role to play in a catchment landscape,
Mm-hmm. And Phil, with multiple parties or pressures, I think this question refers to, responsible for water quality issues, not just agriculture. How do we engage the farming community and get past the thing? It's not us, it's somebody else. Where there are multiple pressures, not just agriculture in an area.
Yeah, and I will say it is justified in some cases. There are much larger pressures in any one catchment when you're talking to farmers, and they'll point it out to you quick enough. And I've seen it myself. There is other factors that are considered as well. I think just providing the context to farmers, like we have in our sectoral plans, those 12 actions, but there's a sectoral plan for wastewater treatment plan. There's a campaign for hydromorphology, so the physical changes to rivers and all that. I think providing that context to an agricultural audience kind of gives it that understanding that when you're in a catchment, there is going to be multiple actors and multiple issues happening. We may not be able to get to join them all, in one conversation or an event, but the idea is to give the context of actions and programs being rolled out for other pressures are happening. They might be happening at different paces and maybe in different priorities, but those programs are being rolled out as well. So I suppose there's a need to talk about the fairness of that. I suppose whenever we host an event or talk to farmers, it feels like you're pointing a finger, but in reality, it's an advisory program that we're trying to get out there. That we're trying to set a high baseline for best practice in our own industry, and let others kind of build up around that as well.
Yeah. A very quick one here, maybe a clarification. You mentioned earlier areas for action and priority areas for action. Just very briefly, is there a difference, or what is the difference for somebody who might be looking back over your presentation?
The areas for action tend to have a wider remit, and they normally fall into restorative actions or protective actions. And in most cases, the priority areas for action fall under restorative. So they'll be kind of a slightly smaller area usually, but if you could probably think of them as almost the same, they overlap largely.
And another very quick one for you is the role of ASAP and how that fits into these catchments. Is it separate? Is it integrated? Is it a piece in the jigsaw with many other pieces? What's the fit?
No, it's largely integrated. Their work program is still, as is. They're taking referrals from, say, the Law Pro process. They're getting out and engaging farmers in those priority areas for action. There's a very strong remit and structure going on that way for them already. Where there's an opportunity we'll basically be taking the lead from the ASAP advisors in any priority areas that we want to go to as well. And we may be drawing on their resources for some of the engagement outside of PAs if it's possible as well, that side as well. But no, that's largely integrated. Where we're in an area that, say, the ASAP advisors aren't working, we'll be trying to engage with say, the general advisors as well and the general advisory networks too, to give them the key messages. And that way you're getting an even wider remit on the water quality message kind of outside of PAAs and outside of the ASAP side of it as well.
This one might call a little bit on your previous experience, Philip, but when you've done the work about focusing in on the water bodies that need attention and that need action, how do you get farmers to implement measures in there, and what is the reaction once those have been completed? Is it just forget about it and move on, I suspect, or do you build on it, or how do you build on it? So how do we collectively, I suppose, get those actions implemented on farms?
So I think everybody's interested in that. So I think through the Better Farm for Water campaign, a kind of a follow-up procedure and a research element will look at the effectiveness of measures. Within that, you'll have revisits, say, from farmers or sorry, from the ASAP advisors to farmers to see what was implemented on the ground. Really, all that will be gathered kind of at a water body scale. And I know the Teagasc Ag Planner is trying to do that to one extent as well, to report back on measures implemented at the water body scale. And then ultimately, with the research elements combined, we might be able to put a figure on, either be it modeled or estimated, for example, the nutrient loss minimized or reduced, or measures in terms of pathway interception and all that side of it. So maybe some kind of quantification of measures implemented and their estimated mitigation potential as well. So that will be part of the program as well, yeah.
Just a quick comment, is there a role for citizen science involved in the likes of this overall campaign, or the involvement of other groups? And I suppose following on from that, how do those contact the likes of a catchment coordinator such as yourself? Where does that fit in?
So I didn't get to mention, but the likes of the National Group Water Scheme there or the Duhallow project, those catchment projects are very good for kind of getting engagement on the public side and on the ground. They may not be listed, say, in a data set by the EPA or whatever, but by speaking to people on the ground, those lead organizations, we expect to meet them through those groups. If not, then through our own, say, our implementation groups as well, they may be invited where they are recognized to be working in an area as a citizen scientist or anything like that, invited to talk, say, at an event or through the implementation group as well to get us their steer, their perspective on the ground. And as I tried to say earlier, that experience on the ground trumps a lot of the data sets. and decision making. So talking to someone on the ground is vital for us. So we'll be looking out for it. Otherwise, we might be meeting them through those implementation groups.
And Philip, there are two questions that are kind of related here about alternative actions that can be implemented on farms. So things like nature-based solutions or physical filtration methods and additives. Those mitigation measures, they're being looked at as well with the new researcher taken on board as part of this campaign, Patricia Nunez. We'll be looking at things like that, alternative actions like that.
Yeah, I'd love to see bottom up kind of innovation. And as we know in the EIP there for funding of measures, there's opportunity for bespoke measures as they're called. So the likes of those provide a kind of opportunity for a showcase of alternative measures. You know, those 8 actions are quite top level to an extent. Nuancing them will be per enterprise and per farm type and all that goes with it, and landscape characteristics. But those innovations on the ground for various other actions and measures will definitely be recognised as well. Yeah.
You mentioned ASSOP advisors and their role in this campaign, but there is a question too about other advisors, not just the focused ASSOP service, but the wider advisory service. What role might they have in the campaign and in these catchments?
Yeah, so there's a massive role there for the wider advisory network. Any individual farmer will have their own advisor, private or not. And so we may engage farmers through an event or whatever, or through the advisors perhaps. We will hope to present, say, the key messages for our water body, in terms of issues and measures and that type of thing as well. Their advisor then is likely to engage, or we engage with them to make sure that there's a kind of a consistent message throughout those different advisory networks. So we've no kind of, we're not tunnel visioned on who we visit or who we talk to essentially through the program. It's the farmer on the ground at the end of the day that we want to have kind of confident that they're doing everything they can on their farm. So regardless of their advisor, we can support that.
Very quickly, Philip, there's one here about the use of pesticides and the pesticides themselves has been a particular issue in a catchment. But from the work you've done there in looking at the issues, categorizing and classifying, part of that that'll have been already identified, I suppose is what I'm saying, in the work you're doing in the catchment, whether it's pesticide or whether it's nitrate, whether it's phosphorus. Am I right in that?
Pesticides are kind of a very nuanced or specific one that'll mostly be picked up through the LCA, the local catchment assessment, and then through our conversation with the lead organisation, we'll understand or identify if pesticide is an issue within it. But ultimately, the process of picking those water bodies does capture, at least through engagement or through the data that's available, what a specific issue is. So that will include pesticides, and that there's over 10 significant issues that you can have in any one water body. So none of them are ruled out, that kind of way. So it is considered in that process, all right, yeah.
I'm going to hop back very quickly to a previous topic we were on, because there's a really good question here about, do we need a centralized system or a platform for farm advisors? I'm assuming for all farm advisors, to get all advisors up to the same knowledge, same speed on catchment management and measures. So, that the need for, or the requirement for, of a central system of keeping those professionals updated.
Yeah, ideally, I know the Ag Planner is a version of that as well. The catchment assessment approach then is largely for the ASAP advisors, but for the moment, definitely as we work towards that, it may be a visit to an advisory office and kind of give a verse on the catchment assessment approach, the water quality issues and all that goes with it, and give a kind of a raise the baseline on that knowledge. And that's part of the remit and upskilling farmers and advisors and advisory network on the issues and how to deal with these issues. And essentially just to get to that point where you're confident that the measure being implemented will address the right issue. So although that's kind of in the pipeline, it may take some training days or event days or something that'll bring a kind of a knowledge base on catchment assessment to all the advisors and farmers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose even the NMP online tool that we use carries a huge amount of water quality information now and is available to all advisors.
Yeah.
Eddie, I might hand back to you because I've a feeling that you might have a few queries of your own to ask.
Well, I have to say, Fiona, you've quick fire questions there. Magnus Magnuson would want to watch out. I think you got to get through those questions very quick. I'd like to put a question to both of you, actually. You're both working as catchment coordinators in different catchments, one in the Boyne and one in the Blackwater. And Philip has given a very good overview of the level of detail and knowledge that's known and about how we're going about implementing it. With the I think there's 8 catchments. You could say 9 if you count the Uillinn, as well as the Blackwater, as well as the Bandon and Blackwater, or Bandon and Lee. Sorry, I beg your pardon. But is the same level of detail? Are we at the same up to speed at the same level across all the catchments? And is the level of engagement pretty uniform there, or how are things going across all of them?
Yeah, I might just
take a Fiona.
Yeah.
Drop in. I'll jump in there very quickly and say yes. There's a huge amount of information. When you apply the same process, the same logic as Philip has applied to the Blackwater, when you take that process and apply it to the Boyne or the Shore or wherever else it is you're dealing with, you can hone in on those areas exactly as he said. So it's a really, I suppose, logical type of a process. Now, that's what I like about it, that the issues might be different for Philip than they are for me, but that's part of the answer. It's looking at individual uniqueness rather than applying, as you said at the start, the one broad brush stroke to everything. So it's fine tuning and honing in on it, and then within that, then the engagement piece, like even looking at the questions that have come in there, Eddie, there's huge appetite for that type of information. At that stage, the questions here about when can we really look at this? So despite the fact it's been there, it's presenting it in that local type of a usable information that we can kind of get our teeth stuck into locally.
Yeah. So it is there, like across all of those catchments and the catchments that aren't in the catchments of concern that were identified for nitrate entering the estuaries. The same level of data is same at the same scale, broken down into the individual water bodies across the whole country.
I actually have that. That's actually done at a national scale, that data set, and that process is done at a national scale. And I do expect some of the data sets to be updated soon enough as new EPA data comes in and new information comes in. But yeah, that's kind of been developed at a national scale, but we're obviously focusing the resources and time on the Better Farm for Water, those 8 catchments. And what I will say is just, Eddie, the engagement around water quality is, there was a time when you couldn't mention water quality in an agricultural context, 8 or 9 years ago or more. And there was a time when it was a harder pill to swallow. But the engagement these days, as we kind of take, I think, this catchment approach where we're not identifying or singling out one particular problem, we're all trying to give the context of a landscape area and the context of other pressures. And so it becomes a kind of a catchment problem as opposed to a sectoral problem, that kind of way. So the engagement is there, even if you come in cold to some areas that haven't seen it, haven't seen this or been exposed to this side of it. I think there's a bit more understanding and a bit more interest there as well than before.
Philip, I think that's a very positive note to finish up on. I've just looked at the clock and I see it's 10:30, so I'm going to call it for today. Just to say thank you very much for a very thorough overview of what data is available, how it's gathered, how it's broken down, and how it's being used, and of the stakeholders involved and the greater level of engagement with that. And Fiona, thank you very much. You made my job very, very easy with regard to doing questions. I was sitting back here and taking it all in. I don't know how you did it. I'd like to thank very much the people in the background call, Summers and Yvonne Marr and others that are there. Certainly for me, I just rock up here this morning and have a shower and put on a shirt and ask questions, make my job very, very, very easy. So thanks very much to those that aren't so obvious and upfront, that have done a lot of work to make these weekly seminars happen. Next week, we have Dr. Maeve Henshin, who's given a talk with regard to the bioeconomy week that's coming up. Bioeconomy is, I suppose, all things production-based, coming from a biological land-based system, and the bioeconomy week is nationally happening next week. So we'll tune in and hear what Maeve has to say about that. So without any more, I'll just say thanks very much to all of you for coming along and listening. Thanks to Philip and Fiona, and I wish you the best. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thank you.